Hello everybody, welcome back to the podcast. And in the spirit of Christmas, today we are going to be talking about the history behind the Christmas tree. From what I've discovered, you would be surprised by a lot of it. The Christmas tree was actually something very common in ancient cultures, but they wouldn't call it the Christmas tree because obviously Christ doesn't exist yet. But they did, however, respect the winter solstice. And the idea was that the evergreen of these trees, hence the evergreen trees, would be enough to remind people of the fall. It would be enough to remind people of the farming season that was coming up in spring, to get them through the cold era and kind of give them hope to get through the cold winter solstice. The tradition was made popular by the Romans. They would leave them in their homes and even in their temples as decorations from December 20th to about February, just as good reminders of and good hopes of a prosperous farming season. But they weren't the only culture to do something similar. The Egyptians did it too with palm trees, and palm leaves. I'm sorry, not trees. The Druids would ornament any evergreen forests that they found. They would put their prized possessions near it in hopes of a prosperous following year farming. What I found when I was doing research on it, the biggest thing I found was that apparently a lot of cultures believe that the evergreen tree, the smell it gave off, something about the way it had its connection to Mother Earth, was that it would deter evil spirits and illness away from your house, which is what you would want during the cold months, because let's face it, that's when everybody gets sick and or dies. Look that stat up. Now let's fast forward to the tree that we now know as somewhat today comes into the picture. So let's address a couple things. The Christmas tree is not as much of a pagan symbol anymore as people like to make it claim out to be. This was actually a big problem when coming to America, when European settlers started coming to America. Puritans alone were oddballs. They thought decorating for Christmas was unholy and it was sacrilege because it meant obstinance of wealth, and that any form of decorating was a sin for Christmas. Actually, so much so that they would in Massachusetts, they would fine people for hanging up Christmas decorations because they considered a mockery of Christ. But let's look at it realistically here. If you are a Christian in the late Roman period trying to convert people to Christianity, there's one part you have to remember about the Apostles' Creed. We are one holy Catholic apostolic church. And essentially the word Catholic means universal. What better way of being universal than to welcome in new symbols to help people understand the meaning of the season? And that's where I can make the argument of it's no longer a pagan symbol, because just like other great things, like the Romans taking over the Greek gods and Greek culture, the Christians did the same thing with the Roman culture. It makes it easier to convert people when they have something familiar to stand with. With that said, let's fast forward from the Roman period to the 16th century. 16th century pops around, and it's still a common tradition to do this around that time of year. It would be it's one of those, it's more of a cultural tradition than a religious tradition at this point. And a lot of especially Germans, I should say, it was a very popular thing in Germanic, former Roman areas, that, hey, we have to have some form of an evergreen in our house to either ward away spirits or for good luck in harvesting. It was not necessarily a religious symbol, but the man who would make it a religious symbol was the ever-dreaded Martin Luther. Martin Luther is actually the first one credited for hanging lights on the Christmas tree. Now, in light of other situations going on, if you couldn't find an evergreen, a lot of families would just build little pyramids of like just basic plywood. Well, what we nowadays consider plywood, scrap wood, and they would build these pyramids and decorate them with evergreen like branches and leave candles around it, not necessarily in it but around it, out of respect. Martin Luther was credited with being the first one to bring home a Christmas tree and put candles on it as a way of remembrance. And as a result, he saw his inspiration was the twinkling lights of the Christmas starry night. Now let's fast forward to us Americans. So, as I said before, it was the religious zealots that worked their way to America to begin with, the Puritans and many of the other early settlers, were not completely on the idea of Christmas trees. Some of it, like I said earlier, the Puritans found it to be an oddity. They found it to be unholy, and many other Americans just thought it was unnecessary. It was something from the old world. We're here to make new traditions, not necessarily live in the old ways. So we have to find our own things. But as the Germans would come into the picture, they would bring with them the German immigrants of the late 1800s or late 1700s, early 1800s. They would bring this Christmas tradition with them, and most of the American populace did not like it. As I stated before, some places even implemented a fine for hanging up Christmas decorations in general, not let alone bringing home a Christmas tree, putting a dead tree in your house. And by the 1840s, it wasn't necessarily a lie, but it was an untruth, I'll call it. It was a truth out of context, so to speak. This truth of, well, the Christmas tree is a pagan symbol. Yes, it was, but it's unfortunately, but it was enough of a lie to make, and it was again furthering the divide between the German immigrants coming into America and the already here Americans, because they thought it was weird. Edit this out. So, what saved the Christmas tree in America? Let's just say it was the Victorian era that saved the Christmas tree. By the late 1840s, Queen Victoria and her German prince Albert, again, very German family for being English, they took a picture and posted all around the world of them and all their kids sitting beneath the Christmas tree. And just like everything else in Victorian England, it spread its cultural roots throughout the rest of the world, and it became fashionable now. All of a sudden, the Christmas tree was now, because of Queen Victoria, was now popular in America, and by the 1890s, they would start putting ornaments on your trees. That's why if you go to your grandparents' house and you find you start digging, you start asking questions about, hey, do we have any ornaments from when, from bygone eras, late 1880s, 1890s, your grandparents might still have some because it meant something then. You had these German families that would now feel like part of society, and they held on to them. Like, for example, today my parents and my parents are going to went and got our Christmas tree today, and we got to dig through the boxes. We got to see some of these cool old ornaments from when my immigrant ancestors came to America. And I'm not even just talking about just German. I should clarify this. We have handmade Italian Christmas ornaments that have been passed down from generation to generation from my mom's side. And then on my dad's side, we have some very old German glass ornaments, handmade glass ornaments, that they're too fragile to put on our tree now because we have pets and we still have some young kids in the house. But it's remarkable how much this meant to the German people. So by the 1890s, so by the 1890s, it was actually this idea of the Christmas tree was so popular that in traditional German culture, the tree is only supposed to be anywhere from 3 foot to 4 foot. Nothing major, not supposed to take up everything else. But now, because of Queen Victoria, the Christmas tree was now an icon. So Americans, us in our traditional American style, would take that and run with it. That's when we see the start of these popular 7-8 foot trees going from floor to ceiling in houses, being lit up with early. They still used candles. They still had, some companies were starting to make these little electric flicker lights, which were still just as much of a fire hazard as the original candlelight. But it's us Americans again saving the tradition in the weirdest way possible. Now let's take a step into the 20th century, early 1900s, where kind of what we know of the Christmas tree as in today starts becoming being into fruition. The Christmas trees of traditional German immigrants were they liked food a lot for some reason. They would hang apples, they would hang homemade cookies with stained, I'm sure anybody that's come from any side of German roots, or even not. So I remember we used to make them in school. The little star cookies that you would make with the stained glass windows in the center. That's using candies and stuff. That is a actual German tradition that's gotten passed down through the years. It was during this time period too we started seeing the tradition of hanging popcorn around the tree, and then by the 1830s they kind of perfected the Christmas lights. So now you could keep your Christmas tree lit all day, and but it did more than that too. You now saw it taking on a whole nother cultural aspect. Every one of us, whether you're in a big town, small town, you have your yearly Christmas tree lighting in town square. First of all, you can thank electricity for making that popular, but it was also nice to finally see one of the oldest traditions of not just Catholics, Protestants, but of the world, really, being brought back from the dead. Because now you had your civic centers, your town squares, all being lit up by beautiful, magnificent 20-foot Christmas trees to celebrate the season. And of course, leave it to the Rockefellers to be the ones to mainline that tradition. Starting in 1931, the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree came out of the Depression era. It was the first year that this magnificent big tree had lights on it. Let's fast forward to 1931, where this first real display of a magnificent city center tree took place. And the biggest part of it was it was fully functioning with lights, because at this time they were still you still had a lot of people with they would just decorate the tree with ornaments. They would just decorate it with the tradition of candles kind of went away, because for obvious reasons Christmas trees like to go up in flames. But the tradition of putting lights on the tree was starting to take over, and that is best exemplified in 1931 when at the Rockefeller Center in New York, not too far from Times Square, actually I believe it's in Times Square, lit the first big massive Christmas tree, which has now become a tradition every year. The first Christmas tree was recorded, let me check my notes, it was recorded with up to 50,000 Christmas lights, which at that time, that's a huge energy consumption, considering it's 1931, you're in the middle, or you're at the start of the Great Depression here. That's a lot of energy being wasted. But again, you're in the Great Depression. I'm sure this helped many people feel good about the season when things weren't so great. Where does that leave us? We've gone through the brief very brief history of the Christmas tree. It was a tradition of the ancient peoples of Rome, Gaul, even Egypt, all had this notion of during the winter years or winter months to hang some form of an evergreen in your house. Fast forward to the 16th century, and now it's becoming a symbol. If you're starting to see it generate into the symbol of being around Christmas, all thanks to a man I have a lot of personal issues with, Martin Luther. All that based from an inkling of the stars. And then we fast forward to a time in America where it was unseemly to have a Christmas tree, let alone decorate your house for the holidays, and to the point to where some states would fine you for it. And now we fast forward to the mid 1880 or 1800s, where because of one Queen Victoria, doing it, now it's okay. You see American households doing it. You see people all over Victorian Europe doing it. But leave it to us Americans to take it to the next extreme. We put handmade ornaments, glassware, shiny things, and then by the 1930s we see the development of the lights, garland, and it's now not only just in our homes, but it's also taking over our cities. And now it's just a symbol of feel good for anybody around Christmas time. There's nothing better than the smell, at least for me. I grew up with a gas heater in our living room. You smell the gas heater mixing with the pine trees, or with the pine of the pine tree, the Christmas tree, and it just makes you feel good, makes you feel satisfied with the season. You could be having the shittiest day of your week, but you come home to that lit Christmas tree at the right time, and you just know everything's gonna be all right. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed this little history on the Christmas tree. I hope you learned something. With that said, Merry Christmas. I hope you and your family are taking care of this season. And it probably won't be my last video before the new year, but in case it is, Merry Christmas, have a happy new year, watch your six, have a good night.